Okay, this video is going to show a different type of price discrimination. Although it's not really going to be price discrimination that we're going to look at. It's something called nonlinear pricing, and can be a form of price discrimination. What it really is a way of thinking about why it is. In some cases, you might see like fixed charges in addition to a charge per unit. So a good example to think about this, to think about what we're talking about here, is an amusement park. So you have an amusement park with a whole bunch of different rides at the amusement park, and and then we're going to look at demand for one individual here, and really sort of looking at one person's demand for rides. And on the horizontal axis, we have the number of rides. And what we really mean by that is the number of different times they're going to go on, say, different roller coasters, different types of rides. So it's not necessarily riding the same ride over and over again. But the number of this would be the total number of times they would ride on different rides once they're in the park. And what you'll often see in a situation like this is you have an admission fee that you have to pay to get in the park, and then you can have a price per ride as well. And so why does that make sense? Well, and what you're really doing there is having nonlinear pricing, and in particular the fee that you have to pay to get in the park makes the pricing nonlinear. Linear would simply mean that if you're linear pricing would be a case where you're simply charging one price for all units that a person would purchase, and so that revenue would be a linear function of the quantity. And then what we're really sure the reason that this is called nonlinear is that if you think of the revenue that you're going to make from the customer, it's not going to be linear in the quantity, and you'll get around that because you'll have a fixed charge. So let's suppose you have this person's demand curve, and the firm happens to, the amusement park knows this person's demand curve. And then what they can do is they could charge one price per ride without a fixed entry fee. Well, what you would do is with a linear demand curve, you take the marginal revenue curve that you'd have in here. I don't want to draw the marginal revenue curve in, but you know it would be steeper than the demand curve. And in fact, twice as steep. And so it would give us a quantity here. I'll call that Q1, and that's really the number of rides that this person would take if they were being charged one price, and the profit maximizing price per ride would be P1. So with a profit maximizing, if the monopolist is going to charge one price, and it's going to be a price per ride once they get into the park, they would charge a price of P1 per ride. And because we'd have a marginal revenue curve coming down here that would intersect this marginal cost right here. And that would give us the quantity of profit maximizing quantity of Q1. We charge a price of P1, and the person would ride this many times. Now, if you're the monopolist here and you're charging a single price, then if this also happens to be the average cost, then this would give you the profit here. If we leave that aside, we just think about revenue. Let's just think about how can you get more revenue. Well, there's a way you could get more revenue from this person, and is charge them a fee an entry fee plus a price per ride. Now, if you're the monopolist, you're the amusement park operator, you would never want to set your price per ride lower than the marginal cost. Because if you set your price per ride below marginal cost, then if you set a price below that, people are going to choose to ride based on the price you're charging them per unit or per ride. They're going to choose to ride the ride to an extent where you'd actually be losing money on the last few times they go on the ride. In other words, you're not covering like the cost of electricity or the cost of having somebody, make sure everybody, operator coming by and make sure everybody's strapped into the roller coaster. you need to make sure you're going to charge a price per ride that's at least going to cover the marginal cost. So let's just say that we'll charge this price. This is supposed to be a capital P, so a special looking price here. That'll be the price per ride, and then you can charge an entry fee. Well, if you're going to have a second part of this price with the entry fee, and you're the consumer, well, what we need to do is think about from the consumer standpoint, would you be willing to pay the entry fee to get into the park? Because transaction still has to be voluntary here. If you don't like the terms and conditions, then you won't attend the park. So if we're asked, like, if you're going to charge if you face an entry fee and a price per ride, are you going to want to enter the park? Well, if you face a price per ride of P bar here, then if you do enter the park, you're going to ride this number of times. We'll call this Q bar. Actually, I'm going to put a bar on top of this here. So if you face a price of P bar per ride, you're going to ride Q bar number of times. But now you've got to pay an entry fee too. Okay, are you going to want to pay the entry fee? Well, if you get in the park and you're charged the price of P bar per ride, you're going to ride Q bar times. You're going to pay this much, this rectangle here, in terms of the revenue or your expense of riding the rides. And on riding that number of rides, you're going to receive consumer surplus. The area under the demand curve and above the price per ride is consumer surplus. And that would be this entire region here. So let me draw it in. This entire rectangle would be consumer surplus. So if you face the entry fee, then from the consumer's standpoint, you would say, is the entry fee greater or less than your consumer surplus? If the entry fee is less than or equal to your consumer surplus, then you'd be willing to pay the fee to get in, because you know you're going to pay the fee to get in, and then you're going to be charged P bar units, P bar dollars to ride the rides once you get in. So this would give, from a consumer's standpoint, how you would make this decision. If the entry fee is greater than your consumer surplus, so riding this number of rides, you figure like, oh, okay, I'm going to get $50 worth of consumer surplus, but the entry fee is $75. Well, then you're going to, if you're a rational consumer, you'll just stay home. You won't go to the admission. You won't purchase the admission. You won't go to the park at all. So this is the factor you'll be looking at here. Now, in theory, if you're the seller and you knew exactly what the individual buyer's demand curve would be, you could set an entry fee that would be equal to this entire area of consumer surplus and extract that entire consumer surplus using an entry fee. And again, you would still want to make sure you charge a price per unit, per ride, to reflect the marginal cost of the rides. And in effect, nonlinear pricing with an entry fee can be a way of more or less coming very close to doing perfect price discrimination. You set a price equal to marginal cost to make sure that the consumers don't go on too many rides, because it's costly to you to operate each of the rides. And there's no point, like, you're going to lose money if you're running the ride and there's only one or two people on it. It's going to cost you more to run the ride with one person on it. And so you want to make sure you don't set this price too low that you lose money. You're operating rides where it's costing you more in electricity, more in cost than operating. But then what you're going to do is you're going to use that entry fee as a way to attempt to extract consumer surplus. Now, this isn't really price discrimination because we've only looked at one person here. Price discrimination would come across different individuals. And so one area where you might see something like price discrimination using an entry fee is maybe two different things. One is you could buy I know at the Pike County Fair, you can buy a wristband that allows you to go on unlimited rides. Or alternatively, you could buy tickets, and you have to pay a certain number of tickets. You have to give a certain number of tickets per ride. So if you've got the entry, if you've got the wristband, you get to ride for free, and if you've got don't have the wristband, then you have to be paying tickets each time you go for a ride. So that would be a type of price discrimination here. And then what you'd really be sort of doing is that the person who would want to go on a lot of rides, have a demand curve where they have a lot of rides and a lot of consumer surplus, they would be willing to pay the entry fee. Whereas a person whose demand curve maybe is very steep, very inelastic, but they only want to go on a couple of rides, right? So you're going to go in, you're going to ride that roller coaster, you're going to go ride 2 different roller coasters in the amusement park, and then you're done. That person, might be willing to pay, like, say, $20 per ride, knowing they're only going to want to go on twice, and say like a $75 admission fee to get into the park. So by having those 2 different pricing options, that's where you'd be getting into sort of like more of the actual price discrimination part of this. But nonlinear pricing and the effect of entry fees is an important concept just in managerial economics and sort of thing to sort of understand, like something that you see all over the place in the world, because economics is about what happens in the real world. And so you see gyms, amusement parks, different places have entry fees. And in effect, what you're trying to do in that case is you're trying to capture some of the consumer surplus that you'd have that might otherwise go to the consumer by charging them an entry fee and extracting some of that consumer surplus. So that's nonlinear pricing.